Wow, it is so amazing to meet all of you in person for like the first time for many of you. And for many of you, it's like, rekindling with old friends again, so that's awesome. I'm here to talk today about how we're gonna take everything that we're doing and just like get us to the next level, right? I wanna evolve us in a lot of different ways, but before I dive into that, my name is Nick Anderson. I work at Facebook. I'm a security engineer at Facebook. I'm one of the core maintainers and like developers for osquery currently. I'm really excited about Windows, if you couldn't tell. I have all of my contact information on here, but I'll throw this up again at the end. So like, mostly put this here in case you have seen these names before. You know who you can like direct your anger and your fury at. That's me. I'm this guy right here. So, man, back in 2014, we had this serious need for a cross-platform agent that would give us host-based telemetry, right? That we could deploy at a really, really, really big scale. And there were a lot of solutions that could do this from a commercial off-the-shelf standpoint. Some of these people who are affiliated with those groups are here today, but there wasn't anything that was free. There wasn't anything that was open source. And more importantly, there wasn't stuff that you were very likely going to deploy in your production environments, right? The solutions that existed were really, really good for flight recording, and they might have been the kind of thing you'd be comfortable deploying on like your engineers' laptops, because we don't necessarily care if their laptops break sometimes. They're engineers, they'll fix it, they'll be fine. But if it breaks on your website, that's really, really bad, right? So like you weren't necessarily gonna drop your agents there. So a huge amount of this emphasis on enterprise and like your corporate space, but not on your production space. The only thing that really kind of had this correlative to what osquery is today was WMI, right? If you think about what we do, this like state machine, it's only WMI and it only really existed on Windows, right? So like that's, again, it's not this great solution for how we would get there. And as Facebook engineers were like going around the world and going to conferences and talking to people, we all kind of recognized this pattern that everybody had a solution to do this. But it was some sort of like a hacky script. It was something they had like thrown together to meet their enterprise's needs. And there wasn't anything that was this good like uniform solution to all of these problems, right? And so Facebook really wanted to fix this. And it was the sense that like so many engineers go to different companies and all of them had the same kind of gripe that they're building a tool again and again every time they leave. And it'd be awesome if we had this one awesome tool that I could just use no matter where I go, right? And we had this vehement desire as this was being developed that it needs to be something that focuses a lot on industry standards, right? It needs to be approachable from anybody that comes to this team, at least in the sense of if I'm an engineer, it should not be a very difficult bar to entry for me to get into this game and start using this unified tool that will match any of the needs that I might have, right? And we come to osquery, right? We landed on a solution, which was freaking sweet. We have this really great pattern to an industry problem that a lot of people experience. And we definitely love to open source things. So like Facebook is really excited about community engagement and how do we open up and be more open in the world. And so it was a very natural discussion to have this be an open source solution. So that way when engineers do go to other companies and they move on to the next stages of their lives, this would still be an available toolkit that they had, right? Good examples of this, like think about Thrift or HHVM or Proxygen or like Jester, all of these other awesome Facebook projects. It's very natural for osquery to fall into that same vein. And we wanted to make sure that we were really focused on like the actual goal, right? I was talking earlier about what this core problem was, which was how do we get this telemetry from the host? That had to be at the forefront of our mind, right? We're not setting out to like solve all of these different problems. We just had one goal. How do we get good telemetry from our hosts? And what we really ended up finding, and I'll kind of like touch on this later, was that we needed a lot more than just a tool, right? Like I said earlier, right? Everybody had hacky scripts that would do this. It's easy to get host-based telemetry back. What we found that we ended up needing was a community, right? We wanted to start building something where we could all start having this conversation about how do we solve this problem. And I mean, we got that, right? Like this room is packed, which is freaking sweet. So we focused on all of these foundational components and we just kind of hoped that a lot of this stuff was going to pan out in the end, and it definitely did, as you can see. And we, as a part of these foundations, wanted to make sure that we were supporting what mattered the most to us. Some of you might have heard before, like we try to focus on Facebook first because to us, like at the end of the day, that's the most important thing for us is making sure that we're solving our own needs. And in order to do that, we were focusing on like common divisors of platforms. So like in the first iterations, it was all POSIX based, right? We're definitely on Windows now, and that's because we're adapting to the changing world. We needed to be on Windows. And we'll see where that goes in the world. Oh no. And we really wanted to, like, again, I've said this already, but we wanted to focus on using industry standards, things like SQL, right? Things like RocksDB, something that was already well adapted in other use cases that we knew that we could rely on. So that way we're trying to solve this one specific problem and we're not trying to fix all of the broken components that are helping to build up this product. And lastly, we really wanted to ensure that this community was as approachable as possible. And this really addresses why this community has gotten so big. We have been very approachable. We have been very open. We really make it a priority to be open for people who are new to the project to get involved, right? And find their voice. And yeah, man, here we are. There's a conference. I'm talking at it. It's crazy. But I think it's one thing for me to stand up here and try to spin this really awesome tale about how we've grown, right? I think it's another thing entirely to actually like look at the numbers. And when Jason started putting the stuff up about like the con statistics, I panicked a little bit and I was like, oh crap, he's gonna talk about the stuff I'm talking about. Because we currently have over 200 unique contributors since we have open sourced the project. To me, that number is awesome. I was really excited when I saw this number. To some other people, like that might not be that impressive. But another way to think about this is like, what does that look like in terms of line growth? It's not even linear, like it's actually kind of quadratic. This is just looking since we've open sourced the project in January of 2015, more or less. So it's sort of the late 2014 timeframe. We have ended way up there. This, 234 unique contributors. That's freaking sweet. And these are like unique people who have maybe never written code before in their lives. Some of these people, their first open source pull requests were to osquery, which I think is really, really cool. But you might not have noticed, there's actually another line down here. It's that one, it's in red. What is this line? This is the osquery core team. Right? We'll talk about this in a second, but let's look at some other ways that osquery has grown, which are, again, I think that like it really speaks to how impressive this project is. We've had over 250,000 lines of code added. That's a lot. That's like a big, code project, right? Hopefully a lot of people can back me up on that, but 130K removed I thought was important to talk about because when you think about what a healthy project should look like, you should have a lot of removed code. You're removing cruft, you're making sure that it's sustainable and you're not supporting old broken things, right? But that's again, this really cool quadratic growth. It's almost the same growth that we had with the contributors. 250,000 code, lines of code added, 130 removed. That's awesome. And that's just the lines of code, right? We also have Slack. Slack has great statistics. We can again see, I know that this is a bad picture, right? So I blew it up for you. I've got your back, don't worry. You can't see that. You're like, Nick, I can't see this picture. I'm like, I know, I've got it, it's cool. We have weekly active users from Slack. And I thought weekly active users was the best because I really wanted to start looking and analyzing what our sustained growth has been. This might not look that impressive, right? But 215, this kind of matches up with our unique user base, but they're not correlated, right? Unique contributors may or may not be active in the Slack community, but we have 215 people who are actively hitting the Slack all the time, talking about things, getting involved, starting the conversation, doing all of the good stuff. The growth on this was, again, really, really interesting to look at. When we open sourced this project, we were somewhere around 75 people that were weekly active users. That was, again, in the beginning, which that's phenomenal to me. We open source a project and we instantly have 75 people who are active in this. But where we ended is now currently 200. We've more than doubled that growth in a handful of years, right? So again, it's unreal to me what the growth of this community has looked like. But now let's go back and talk about that line I pointed out earlier. This has been really difficult, right? As the osquery community keeps growing, and I want it to keep growing, it's so cool meeting you all, and this is a very awesome project to be a part of. We're not meeting that challenge on our end, right? Our core osquery engineering team has never been much more than 10 people in our best day, And that's not even people who are actively contributing on the project. That's just like people affiliated with the team who know the product and can like deal with it if they need to. I think throughout the entire history of this, we've had 4 people who were like constantly actively engaged in this. And you can go and look at like the GitHub contributors list and you can see who those 4 people are. But the point is that we've had 215 weekly active users, over 200 unique contributors, and only about 4 engineers who are the core maintainers of this. That's a lot. That's hard if you're writing code and you're trying to also maintain this project, right? So it's been hard. And the other problem that we found very quickly was, as we discussed earlier, osquery is this really, really good solution to a problem that a lot of people were having. But what we ended up finding was a lot of people took this really awesome solution and were like, hey, I have this awesome use case. How can I bring these 2 things together? But when you start having that conversation, it really gets to a point where everything that you're looking at, osquery is the best solution to it, even if it's not. And this ended up being difficult for us because so many really good discussions should have come out of, hey, I have this cool idea of how I'd like to use osquery, but we just did not have enough time, right? You have 4 engineers, you have 200 people with these amazing ideas, and they want to talk to you about all the cool things they're trying to do, but again, it's 4 engineers. And they're also balancing like their own personal lives, right? Or their own code, or their own whatever. So it's difficult to find time to make sure that we are like present and actively engaged with the community. And lastly, like this kind of leads into that point, managing inclusion is really, really difficult. We care desperately to make sure that this community feels like they're heard. This is, at least for me, this is a very important thing. And I want to make sure that we do give you the time of day. If you throw up a pull request of code, we get to it. We get a review on there. If you have a question in Slack, someone answered it, right? But again, it's difficult. And what I really wanted to talk to this crew of people today about was like, how do we fix this problem? Because scale is hard. Facebook knows about this firsthand, right? Like we have very big presences. But we've solved those. Like those were engineering problems, and I feel like we had good solutions to how to address that. When you talk about scaling people and how do I manage my interactions with different humans, it gets a little bit harder because that takes more time, and I want to get involved in those relationships and make sure that I understand like your use cases and what is important to you. But I think the way that we can do this is through finding utility or tool in ways that we can empower ourselves, right? This is like an obvious solution. If we can write more documentation, or if we can do other things, give you the tools that you need to do this. But I think one of the easiest things, this is like the most obvious, right? The way that we fix this problem of scale with our community is we throw more engineering at it. So we hire more engineers, right? We encourage other major engineering companies to allocate more of their resources to helping us keep this project alive. Whoops. And we've seen really good examples of this already. There's a handful of companies that are just crushing this, right? I'm gonna say this because I have personal connections with them, but Trail of Bits is doing a great job. That's a good example of somebody who's trying to contribute back, writing documentation, being available on Slack, right? And there's others, there's so many others, right? It would take a lot of time to kind of enumerate them all. And I do wanna say thank you to all of these companies who are chipping in and like giving this effort, but we need so much more of it, right? We have companies who are engaged in Slack and they are helping out in different ways of the community, but we also need it in ways like code reviews and making sure that we're landing code as fast as we're removing it, right? That 250,000 of lines of code, let's try to get that with all of the other companies involved in this project. I think that would be awesome. Another way that we can get there is like find your focus. A really good tool that Facebook likes to use is picking a focused topic and just driving it to the ground. Right? We did this when we started thinking about automation. How do we automate the build process? How do we make it as easy as possible to go from 0 to have a fully built binary of osquery and I'm off and away running? We also did this with testing. We have a problem where we're landing too much code that is just breaking stuff. So how do we get to a state where I don't even think about testing, but I know immediately if I've landed something that's broken? I encourage all of the companies, all of the people who are here, all of that 200 unique contributors, take a week, take some time, pick a focus and just burn it to the ground. Drive it as hard as you can, right? Stay focused. Be empowered. We've had a lot of conversations with people who, like, the conversation ends too briefly. It ends at a point where it was like, I wasn't sure how to get involved. I wasn't sure that I was the right person to do this. I didn't think I had the right skill sets to do it. You do. I promise you, you do. I know this because I've been in that same state, right? Where I didn't think I was the right person for that job, but I'm here, right, in front of you, right? Be empowered. Whatever that means to you, take time to reflect on yourself. What are you good at? Because there's a lot of ways to contribute to osquery that is not C++. You don't have to be really, really good at writing C++ to ask a question on a code review. Maybe you're not trying to leave a nit, maybe you're not trying to fix anything, but you're actively trying to learn, right? You're trying to empower yourself to get more engaged in this community. We have so many different aspects of this repository, right? Tooling, integrations, documentation, query packs. There are people at this conference who are really, really good at thinking up new use cases. Like, hey, I have this great security problem and I'm gonna use osquery to solve it. It was the right tool for the job, and they landed that, right? And they'll go to the GitHub repository and they'll share back. They'll open up a pull request with that query to give back to the community. I challenge all of you to do that. Take a time and think about, like, what am I really good at? What's the thing I can channel and give it back? Like, let's be more open, right? Let's communicate together. And lastly, like, let's look to the future. And let's start thinking, how do we take this community to the next level? I've talked to you about why it's really difficult for us to manage that growth. It's a hard problem, right? And I've talked to us hopefully about like a solution. We can empower ourselves and we can be more open as a community to try to like find the way forward. But I want to challenge all of the people who are actively engaged in this to start thinking, let's say 5 years down the road, whatever number is good for you. How do we go to the future? How do we take this to the next level? And I think the best way to do that is let's stop asking the questions that are restricted based off of infrastructure. So I have all of these cool ideas that I wish I could land, but I can't because of reason X, because of reason Y, because policy at my company, because I can't move quickly in this infrastructure. I want us to stop focusing on what would we do with osquery, what are the things we wish we could accomplish, because I honestly think that that's the wrong question to be asking ourselves. I don't think we should be asking, what could I be doing with osquery? I think we should be asking, what problems am I trying to solve? What are the correct detection use cases? What vulnerability management problems am I trying to reach? What IT asset compliance am I trying to get to? And then use osquery as the afterthought, right? Try to get away from thinking about this glass ceiling of infrastructure, of things that are standing in my way, and let's work backwards. Let's ask the questions we want to be asking, and then try to find the path forward, because it might be the case that osquery is not the best solution on it. Right? So stop focusing on what we can't do. And let's start focusing on the evolution of host-based telemetry. We had a really good solution to this in 2014, but we're 2018 now. Maybe the best evolution of host-based telemetry is not osquery. And I think that's a conversation that we can have at this conference. There might be something that's better. Maybe we need to redesign it. Maybe osquery just needs a bunch of extension and it'll be awesome, right? But I challenge all of you to stop thinking about how can we use osquery to do a thing and start thinking about what's the thing we want to do and how do we get there? Because to me, that's a much more valuable conversation, right? So what's next? Let's ship this, right? We have a weekend. It's not the weekend, right? I'm just now realizing that. We have 2 days to have really good conversations. There's amazing people in this room, right? There's really good engineers. Have these conversations, but don't let it just be that. Don't walk away from this con being like, man, I had some really good talks with some really awesome people. Go and build it, ship it. We've talked about ways that you can contribute. Find the thing that empowers you. Go and build it and ship it. Please. And with that, I really just want to say thank you to everybody in this room. The past couple years of my life have been a complete whirlwind, and I feel so honored to just have hung out with these people, to have talked to you, to have written code with you. I can't thank you enough at all. So here's all of my contact info. Please hit me up. Let's have that conversation about how we take this all to the next level, and that's it. So I have about 10 minutes left. I really wanted to open the floor to questions. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah? All right. Does anybody have any questions? Do you want to yell at me and tell me I'm wrong? That's cool too. I'm definitely ready to have that happen.
The Windows product?
The Windows product.
You were saying WMI is what that was?
Yeah, so...
I heard what W line. That's all I heard.
Oh, man, that's my bad. It was more of just trying to make this correlation that the only really good logical equivalent of what osquery currently is, back in the day, when this was first open sourcing, was WMI, which I am going to totally ruin the acronym. I think it's Windows Management Interface. Someone from Windows can correct me on that. Instrumentation. That's a better I than what I said. It was more to the point that like WMI does a very similar thing where it will give you this like state of the machine, and you can give it a query, and it will give you back the data when you ask it, and it generates it at your query time. But I think the reason that I was trying to make that correlative was a lot of the other tooling that existed at the time was EDRs, which was like flight recording. It was much more focused on recording the events as they were happening, and it was a little less focused on, hey, tell me all of the services that exist on this machine, right? I hope that answered. I think I gave you way more of an answer for your question than you'd actually asked for.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the issues I've got right now is the security team has evolved faster than the IT team has from like just laptop provisioning, right? So
Yeah.
figuring out data sources on the laptop to have identity attribution, right? So you just have a host name that's some random text, doesn't mean anything to me. Security tools blow up, but if I could look at like say the contact card, right, on the contacts app, or if I can look at the first and last name on the message app, stuff like that, right? So
Yeah.
basically using sub-processes of the system to have more attribution points.
Definitely.
Look at that.
We have. There are a lot of companies that are looking at this kind of thing, right? At Facebook in particular, we use the UUID that's tied to the machine, and we kind of call that a day. Because the kind of questions that you're asking are good ones, but they start to get really creepy really fast, right?
Well, that's why I agree with you there.
But-
that's why you look at certain data points. It's like,
Definitely.
what's the harm in a name?
I'm not saying that you shouldn't ask those questions, right? If you're an enterprise, you definitely have justified business need to ask those kinds of questions. But the answer that I would give you is like, all of those are good ideas, but they definitely belong in extensions. Like that kind of feature set is something we would never allow into osquery. At least in the core product that exists on GitHub, because we definitely want to avoid giving away too much data about the user, right? We're trying to get host-based telemetry, and we want to try to respect as much as possible the end user's privacy. This is a really interesting conversation though because of GDPR, but we could take that offline and like
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the
talk way more about that. Yeah, there's also other people here who are very excited about that problem too. So like ask around.
Yeah.
The GDPR thing, and I think the identity management thing too. Yeah. Cool. I can't actually see hands at all, so if you have a question, just go ahead and shout it out.
So I agree with you. I think the community, this is Doug Wilson from Update. I
Hey,
think the
Doug.
community is like definitely the most important part. I've been involved with a couple other open source projects, and a lot of times it's a few people doing heavy lifting and a lot of people just watching. But and I'm one of the people who doesn't really code that much. I'm contributing IOCs and stuff in QueryCon, but
Yeah.
I've never written C++ in my life. But there have been a few times where you have people who sort of get, so super enthusiastic to help out, but they're contributing wrong information, or, how do we balance being accepting of the people who are learning at the same time, keeping the block
Definitely.
going?
This is hard. I very likely don't have the best answer to it because, like I said, managing inclusion it can be really, really difficult because we have people, and like there have been instances in the Slack channels where like I definitely did not manage inclusion as well as I should have, right? And there was times where I did this knowingly, and there were times where I did this completely unknowingly. Like I've had instances where I feel like I've rubbed somebody completely the wrong way, and I had no idea that I had done this. I honestly think that the best way to do this is be more open. I told somebody earlier I wasn't going to say those words, but I'm going to say it because I think it's really important that we as a community be as open as we can. And what I mean by that specifically in regards to this question is like, we need to communicate better with each other about how we're feeling, right? Like if I said something that really upset somebody, there is an awesome direct message feature, and you can hit that up and be like, hey man, you're a jerk. And I'll be like, cool. There is also, the other thing I would encourage you is we have a lot of feedback mechanisms for our team in particular, right? There are other engineers at Facebook who also manage this project and work on it way harder than I do. You can hit them up and be like, yo, Nick is a jerk. And they'll be like, yeah, I know. They won't do it. I mean, they'll like the point I'm trying to make is there should be a mechanism that allows you to get us feedback when we're not doing a good job at managing inclusion. But I do think that these are really rare circumstances, though. I think for the most part, the conversations that I see that happen in Slack are usually awesome. And we have a lot of people who are not Facebook representatives who are answering questions and trying really hard. Or I mean, like, even just as simple as saying, I don't know. This is something I think a lot more people need practice on. I do it all the time. I say I don't know on like a daily basis. It's fun. It's really liberating and you should try it. But I think we have people who are very excited to like answer all of the questions and be really engaged in the community because it's a very cool community. But I think we also need to be ready to just be like, you know what? I honestly don't know the answer to that. Somebody else might. Or point them at documentation. Be like, hey man, I don't know the answer to that, but here's the docs. Have you tried reading those? They'll come back and be like, dude, those you can't search those documents. And they'll be like, yeah, we know, we're trying to fix that. But yes, somebody laughed. Like that's a good inside joke that I was saving for at some point this weekend. I hope that, so like, it's not a good answer, right? And I wish I had a better one, but.
Yeah, no, it's more I just wanted to like remind people that part of the conversation, because I mean, I say I don't know all the time. And that sometimes ropes in those conversations.
Definitely, man. Any others? I have 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And again, I can't see anything, so just shout it out. Yeah.
So you had a slide about the future of host-based telemetry. Would you like to elaborate? Do you have any thoughts about, you said osquery might not help?
I was hoping that you guys would tell me that.
But I mean, why did you put that up?
I put that up because I think that we very often let osquery, like we let infrastructure problems or reasons why we couldn't deploy osquery stand in the way of us making amazing questions answered. We're saying like, I really wish that I could have every process that ever executed in my entire production environment. But we can't do that because osquery is going to give us back too much data, right? Or osquery's audit system isn't fast enough, or like something is broken. And we're like, I don't know, like let's file an issue, let's go and yell at people. But like that's not a reason to stop, right? You have a problem and you need to fix it, which is go and get all the process executions in your environment. And the next iteration, whatever it might be that gets you that thing that you need to do, that's the thing that I'm interested in, right? Like we as developers can learn a lot from these other projects. If there's a better way that we could be getting process and executions for every single host in production, we should be having those conversations, right? And I put that up there in the most vague, general terms that I could, because I'm honestly not sure what that evolution might look like. I really sincerely hope that it's osquery, but it might not be. Maybe it is that hacky script that everybody's got running to get the thing that they need, but let's take that hacky script, find out what makes it so awesome, and integrate it into something standard. Note I didn't say osquery there, right? Like, I don't know what the right answer is, but I feel like we can have those conversations and maybe we can find our way there, right? I hope, again, I don't think that was a super satisfying answer, but I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, right. I think you're...
We can talk more on it later. I'd love to continue that conversation because I think it's controversial, right? I really hope it's osquery, but it might not be.
So I think you're saying we should have the conversation about what we want, boil it down, and see if it's a good fit.
Find what you want, right? Get the figure out the problem and the use cases that you're trying to solve before you just start throwing osquery at it. Because again, right, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You want to just throw osquery at all these problems, which is cool, and it means we get really healthy growth in our community. But it also might not be the best solution. There might be other things out there that do this better than we do, and honestly, they shouldn't be in osquery in the first place, right? Sorry. Again, I'm rambling, but it's a good discussion. I'd love to keep talking about it. Yeah. I'm pointing over there, but I think you're actually over there, so sorry if I was pointing at somebody who I wasn't actually talking to. All right, cool. Well, I've got a minute left. I'll just let it go. If you want to keep talking, I'd love to continue the conversation. Again, my name is Nick. Thank you.